Welcome back to the Insane Asylum. This is Asylum from the Initiative, your host. So I saw an interesting Reddit post asking about if anyone uses carriers to rat, and I know the carrier's out of favor for ratting now, especially with the recent Marauder buff, but carrier ratting is one of my favorite things to do in EVE, and it's actually fairly competitive. Is it as optimal as Marauder ratting? No, but I do still get more income in my carrier than I do in my Marauder while ratting. However, my carrier costs over twice as much as my Marauder, and it does not give me twice as much income. So if you're just looking at income divided by how much your ship costs, then a carrier is not going to be very cost effective. And that becomes even more stark when you account for how much skills go into a carrier versus goes into a Marauder. So a Marauder does have high skills because it is a T2 battleship, but a carrier is even higher. And we'll talk about that, here in a little bit. But I really enjoy carrier ratting. Now, one of the comments I saw in that Reddit post was someone saying that they like to chill and let their dudes do all the work for them. Well, carrier is the opposite. A carrier has fighters, and fighters are not drones, and they don't act like drones. So, out of all the stuff I've done in EVE, carrier ratting is probably the most intense as far as having to pay attention and clicking on things to do stuff. It is a very intense process. It's very fun, it's very rewarding, but it's also very intense because the fighters don't do anything on their own. They just sit there still in space and don't do anything. So you actually have to control all your fighters, similar to how you control a ship. So imagine controlling, your ship plus 3 or 5 other ships all at the same time, and you can kind of get an idea of how intense carrier ratting is. It's also very expensive. This ship I have right here is 4.5 billion ISK is the value on it now. A similar Marauder is probably going to cost about 2 billion ISK, or if I just had an Isktar, that thing's probably worth 500 million maybe. And an Isktar is going to make about half as much as this, but also cost 1/10 as much as this ship. So an Isktar is definitely the sweet spot for making money with minimal investment. So if you just look at that efficiency of ISK earning for invested skills and invested money, an Isktar is definitely the best you're going to get. Marauders are also really good, but Marauders are much more intense than Iskstars. With Iskstars, you can just sit back and you could probably take a nap and earn income that way. But a Marauder is much more intense because you have to manage your bastion mode, manage your modules. If you're using short-range weapons, you have to manage your reps as well. So carrier ratting is good income, and it is definitely better than Marauder ratting. It's not that much more than Marauder ratting, but it's definitely more. And it's relatively safe. A lot of the comments talked about how dangerous it can be, and it can be dangerous if you don't take certain precautions to make it safe. But if you take those precautions, carrier ratting is actually very safe. Definitely safer than Marauder ratting, and definitely safer than Dreadnought ratting. But it's if you're not paying attention or you don't take these precautions, it can be pretty dangerous. You're going to get dropped, you're going to get killed. So talk about income. So I average, and this is anecdotal, and I ran some numbers with a few hours of ratting to make sure that's what, these are fairly accurate, but this is my experience with carrier ratting. So I get about 220 million ISK per hour ratting in my carrier. Now where does that all come from? So my ticks. So your ticks are every 20 minutes you get Concord depositing money or ISK into your account. It's every 20 minutes, and those are the bounties that you've earned by killing pirate NPCs. So about every tick or every 20 minutes, I get about 40 million ISK. 20% of that, 20% of my total goes into the ESS. So that is 10 million. So I get 10 million that goes into my ESS every tick. So that's a total, assuming I don't let anyone steal my ESS. That is 50 million per tick for a total of 150 million per hour just in bounties for the NPCs. Now I also scoop the loot, but I don't do that manually. I drop an MTU at every site that collects all the loot, and after a couple hours of ratting, I'll send a hauling ship around to collect all the cargo from those ships. And for that, I earn about 40 million per hour. You know, occasionally, maybe once an hour, you get a Shadow Serpentis or you know, a special faction. I'm in Serpentis space, so I'll get a Shadow Serpentis rat. But wherever you're at, you'll get a special faction rat that'll drop super rare loot. That, you know, one piece of loot there could be worth over 100 million. So that's not taking that into account, just steady. On average, I get about 40 million in loot per hour from doing that. So that is now a total of 190 million per hour I'm getting. So one of the biggest reasons people do ratting in a carrier or even on a Marauder is to actually not for the ticks, but for the escalations. And I tend to rat havens, and havens lead to 10 out of 10 escalations, which I can usually sell for about 100 million a piece, or I could do it myself and you know, earn anywhere from 100 million, 150 million to upwards of 400 or 500 million ISK from doing that site. But I personally just sell them and don't even worry about it. And I get probably one escalation every 1 to 3 hours. It's very random. Sometimes I'll get a couple in an hour, and sometimes I might go a few hours without getting one. So I'll just say maybe one escalation every 3 hours. So that averages out to about, you know, we'll just say 30 million ISK per hour from escalations. You throw that on top of the 190, and that's about 220 million ISK per hour that I earn. That's solid. And pretty stable and pretty steady that I get. So I noticed in my Marauder, I get about 80% of that, probably closer to 70% of that. So a Marauder is quicker going from site to site, and a Marauder is also quicker in targeting things. But if you look at my carrier here, you'll see it has 3,236 DPS. That's what I have on my carrier. Now we compare that to my ratting Marauder. Another thing to keep in mind is it depends on what kind of ship you use. I'm using a Vargar, which allows me to select my ammo. So I've specifically selected ammo that hits the weak spot of the rats that I'm hitting, which is really going to be thermal and kinetic. So I got the best thermal kinetic ammo I can get that maximizes my DPS. But that's still going to be lower than, well, the resistances I'm shooting into are going to be higher than the very specific damage I chose on my carrier, which is pure kinetic, which is what the Serpentists are the most weak against. But you can see here, if I go to simulate, and that's with my Bastion mode off, but my smart bombs turned off, you can see that I get 1,882 DPS. So it's a little bit over half the DPS that I'm able to get with this. And this DPS is also less effective than with my carrier. But now where the carrier really suffers is warping site to site, because I go 3.5 AU per second warp speed in my Vargar, but I get 1.5 AU per second warp speed in my carrier. So you're going to spend quite a bit of extra time warping from site to site. Also, the align time is much worse. I have 27-second align time here, whereas my Vargar, I think, was a 10-second or so align time. So if you don't pre-align to the next site, you're going to spend a significant amount of time also just realigning to the new site. And we'll talk about some of those details here later. Okay, so that's my income, and that's a comparison to Marauder. I would say, as far as safety goes, I'm probably safer in my carrier than I am in my Marauder. For one, the carrier, I don't have a Bastion module, so if I am in my Vargar, I have to go into Bastion to actually make it effective in battle. If I don't have this, then it's actually a really weak ship. By turning on my Bastion module, it makes it a force to reckon with, but it anchors me to that spot for 60 seconds. So that somewhat offsets the advantages you get with a faster align speed and a faster warp speed with a Marauder, is the fact that if you don't time this Bastion module right, you might be sitting at that site for an additional minute before you can even align out to the next site. So you have to carefully manage this Bastion module to maximize your efficiency on doing this. Okay, so let's talk about skills. Carrier skills are much more drastic. A lot more skills than just doing a Marauder or even an Isktar. Some of the skills I want to talk about are, let's see, catalog. Let's go here. So one of the first ones you have to get, obviously, is capital ships. Is one of the skills that you have to get, and it is an expensive skill, and it is a long train. I have it to level 4 here, and I do pretty well for myself with that. But that'd be, if I want to go to level 5, that's going to be a 2-month long train. One of the other really important ones is going to be your carrier skill, which is super expensive. You're looking at north of 500 million ISK for this skill book here, and it is a very long train. To get carrier 5 here was a 2-month train to get that. You don't have to use carrier 5, but the performance of your carrier is heavily dependent upon your skill in carriers. So in addition to those, your DPS is contingent upon fighter skills. So light fighters. So fighters skill and then light fighters. If you're just doing a carrier, these are the two that you're really going to be using. So fighters 5 was about a 2-month train to get that, which that allows me to get access to tier 2 fighters. Those are going to give me about a 10 to 15% DPS boost, so I'm clearing sites 10 or 15% faster, which is pretty significant, and it was worth the train. That's a 2-month train. Just to get fighters 4 was over 20 days to get that up to there. And you also have light fighters, which is an equally long train. I'm just settled out here at light fighters 4 because that's about as much as I'm willing to invest in this, into carrier ratting. I mean, I love it, but I'm not going to invest 60 days to another 5% increase to DPS when I could just use a super instead. Or by super, I mean super carrier. Okay, so some important capital skills that you're going to have to get is jump drive skills. This is a huge time investment to do that. So the first thing you're going to get is to be jump drive operation. To get this to level 5 is extremely important because it unlocks jump drive calibration, which is a very important skill. Typically, if you're flying capital ships, the bare minimum to be part of a fleet, even if you're just using it as a suitcase, is jump drive operation 5 and jump drive calibration 4. Now if you're going to actually go into combat with capital ships, you need 5 on both of these, and each of these are, I think this was a 1-month long train, could be a 2-month long train, and this was definitely a 2-month long train. So you're looking at 3 to 4 months of training right here just for those to get those level 5, and they're absolutely vital. So jump drive operation, it's really useful just to unlock your jump drive calibration skill, but it also means that you're much easier to jump out to an E-Cyno based on your capacitor skills, because to jump you have to have a high level of capacitor, and this reduces that burden to be able to jump. But it really unlocks your jump drive calibration, which at level 5 doubles your jump drive distance, or your jump distance that you can jump. Okay, those are the skills that go into flying a carrier. So next I want to talk about capital mechanics. The first is a jump drive. All capital ships have a jump drive, as well as Black Ops battleships and jump freighters. So a jump drive, if I open up my map, you're going to see something interesting here. I got a white donut around my location. This white donut is where I can jump to. So if I wanted to go, say, over here to this system, I wouldn't have to go through all these gates. I could just send a Cyno ship over there, light a Cyno in that system, and then I can just instantly jump from where I'm at to that system using my jump drive. So that's interesting. So I don't actually move my carrier gate to gate. I have a Cyno ship that I move around, and if I want to move my carrier, I just jump to that Cyno. So the Cyno ship is the one that takes all that risk. So that being said, almost every single capital pilot has 2 accounts. They have one for their capital ship, and they have another one for a Cyno Alt. If you don't do that, then you're relying on other people to do Cynos for you, and that is crippling for a capital ship, because that means someone has to log in, move a Cyno ship, and just sit there for 5 or 10 minutes to be your Cyno. And it's very difficult to find someone to do that, and for them it's just a pain in the butt. So almost all of us have Cyno Alts. So that's a second account I have, where I have a pilot that has a Cyno that's trained into the Cyno ship, and that can light the Cyno for me. Now that also has skills, because to light that Cyno you have to have recon ships, which is a Tech 2 cruiser. So you got to get the Tech 2 cruiser and get the recon ships. That's a couple months also just to get that for that pilot. Okay, so carrier construction, if you look through my cargo here, so I got my ship. It's got a pretty large cargo bay, but Carriers themselves have a fighter bay where I have my fighters loaded. So this is a regular carrier, so I have 3 fighter hangars, and then I have fighter storage. And I can pull these out and swap them, so I can move in these. I can pull out my kinetic, and I can put in some thermal based fighters if I wanted to. And but right now I have 3 kinetic damage fighters loaded, and each of these has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 fighters in each of these tubes for a total of 28 fighters that all do pretty significant damage. Okay, going down, I have a ship maintenance hangar. So this is when people talk about suitcasing, this is what they talk about. So you can suitcase ships. I don't know, maybe I can suitcase this, we'll see. Oh, no, I can't. I have stuff in that ship there. Let's try that. Yep, there you go. See, I just threw my strategic cruiser in here, and now I can jump around with this thing. So that's what people call suitcasing. You can use a capital ship to suitcase, including a carrier. There's also a fleet hangar. This is where I store a lot of my crap that I loot, is here in my fleet hangar. But right now I have some extra fuel and my mobile tractor units that I'm going to use to loot. And then you have a fuel bay. This is what you use to jump. It's very important to make sure you have enough in here to jump out to an emergency Cyno. Okay, next up, let's talk about safety. Safety for the carrier. So I'm going to undog just so we can see her. So the first thing I have to make sure I'm not going to lose my carrier is really its intel. I got 2 things I'm using for intel here. I have my local chat. So I have my local chat window here. I've pulled it out and I've separated it, and I just closed it out so I had the list of people on system with me. And then I select the member list over here and hit Control A, and that highlights everybody. So what's going to happen here is if someone new comes into this system, then they're going to show up there as not being highlighted. So I can instantly know that someone new is in this system. And if they don't have blue or purple or green next to them, I know that they can hot drop me. So that is my cue to either jump to my E-Cyno or to jump to tether or jump to dock. Alright, next up is my intel channel. So I have an intel channel here. I'm not going to open it for OPSEC reason, but I have an intel channel where I keep track of anyone that's in my alliance space. So one of the benefits of being in a null-sec alliance is you have great intel channels. We have these channels, we just update any neutral or enemy that's in our systems. We know who they are, we know where they're at, where they're going, and what ships they're flying. We keep track of them. So I'm always watching this to see who's nearby. And if they get uncomfortably close and they're in a ship that bothers me, then I might just jump to tether or jump to my emergency Cyno. Just to get away from them. But I'm always watching that and see how close action is to me. So the next thing you have is an insta-dock or insta-tether bookmark. So as you can see here, I have an insta-tether bookmark right here. And when I'm fighting in sites, I'm always aligned to this insta-tether. And if I get spooked, if a neutral jumps in the system, or there's some action happening right next door to me and I just don't feel safe being out in space anymore, then I warp to this insta-tether. Now I always remain aligned to it so that I can instantly warp out. So at no point am I just sitting perfectly still where I have to wait 30 seconds to align out, because that's very dangerous and makes it easier for you to get caught. But since you are doing all these sites while aligned to an insta-tether, it makes you extremely difficult to catch. Not impossible to catch, but extremely difficult to catch. So one of the other things that I did was I have a third account that I use, and on that third account I have core scanner probes that I use to monitor all of the probe scanner signatures in the system with me. And if there's any wormholes in here, I just don't bother ratting here. I find a system that does not have wormholes, and that's where I'll do my ratting. Additionally, I always watch this window for any new signatures that pop up, because it could be a wormhole, which could have a force that wants to kill me on the other side of that wormhole. So any new signature that pops up, I'll use that third account. I'll use that scanning alt to scan down that site and find out what it is, find out if it's a wormhole or something else. Additionally, that scanner alt is a cloaky ship that goes to every site ahead of my carrier. And why I do that is I want to make sure that if I'm jumping to a site, it does not already have a dreadnought there. Because some of these sites will spawn dreadnoughts at the end of them, and if you jump too close to a site that has a dreadnought, they're going to tackle your carrier and kill you. I learned that the hard way. I lost a carrier by doing that. So now I employ that third account to pre-scout my sites and make sure I'm going to a safe site. Okay, another thing, I have my Cyno, I have my emergency Cyno, so that second alt that I have, we talked about, they remain online while I'm ratting, and I can either move them to another system as an emergency Cyno, or I can emergency jump out to them, so I can tether and dock up at a Fortizar or a Keepzar, or I can have them in system with me, so if I need help, if I'm asking for the Alliance to save me using their capital umbrella, I can warp that Cyno onto grid with my carrier and Cyno the entire rescue fleet in, which drastically increases my survivability if I have that ready to go. Some other things you gotta watch out for. You can, now I do have equipped a network sensor array on my carrier. You gotta be careful using this though, because it lasts for a minute, and for a minute you cannot initiate warp. So if I hit that and then while that is cycling for 60 seconds, if an enemy comes into the system, I cannot warp off the site. Now I'm still aligned, but I cannot warp off the site. So that's very dangerous. So I rarely use that. Okay, well that's enough for this video. I'm going to separate this out, and in the next video I will do some sites for you so that you can see what that looks like. So I hope you found this informative. I hope this helped you understand what's all involved in carrier ratting. So if you have any questions or comments, please drop them in the comment section below, and I will be happy to answer them. And I look forward to talking to you next time. Until then, fly dangerous.